Hi folks, Andy here. This is the first video, I believe, of week 3 of the CAD and modeling course. And I wanted to talk you through starting a CAD model. Now, I realize that the class has quite a wide range of pre-existing CAD skills. And I'm assuming, well, basically I want to get you all to the same point. That may be a big challenge because everybody has a different level of interest and experience. But at this point, the first 2 weeks of videos were pretty basic for some of you and a really tough refresher for a lot of you. At this point, though, you've decided what the thing is you're going to model. And I've got some more detailed videos on some techniques and some tools you can use. But what I want to cover in this video is how to get started and maybe thinking about the workflow of your CAD model after you know what you're going to make. So let's get started. Here's my just open for SolidWorks, and I'm going to create a new file here. Here's just a new blank part file. Now, while it's sort of attractive to think of starting your model with an assembly because you know that you're going to make a multi-part thing, really the best way to get started is to think about one part as being kind of your base part. What part in your collection of things kind of contains the core geometry? What part in your set of things really will act like the key for everything else? And if you can decide what that is, then pick that as a starting point. There is never one answer. So, for instance, suppose we were going to make an object to be put on a desk, put on a table that has some parts to it. Well, we could start with the thing that was at the base. That's kind of logical. And you could start to think about, okay, I'm going to define that as my base geometry and work up from there. So maybe we'll give that a try. So if that's the case, I'm going to pick my top plane here, and I'm going to start with an extrusion. And so you all know how to do this. I'm just going to pick an extrusion and give it some dimensions. Now this is, I know the size of the part roughly I want to make. Maybe it's going to be 120 millimeters by 80 millimeters. And so now I've got some basic geometry. And because I started a protrusion and I'm going to be using this is going to be 0.75 inch plywood, let's say. And so there's the starting point of my part. Now, if I wanted this to be part of an assembly, then this is a good place to start, but there's not a whole lot of features there to distinguish it. So perhaps, in addition, I know that I'm going to screw something down to this as an attachment point. Now, if you've got some other parts that you're bringing in from another model, like a GrabCAD model, then the geometry from them you could fit in here. If there's some unusual geometry in this, then maybe you want to incorporate that in your sketch. So I'm editing my sketch. I know that perhaps in my geometry, I'm cutting it with some kind of funky curve. And so maybe this becomes my starting geometry. And with this, because it's totally not symmetrical, it means that I've got some assembly features that I can key on. For instance, obviously, the surface is a unique feature. And now, because this is no longer symmetrical, I've got some vertices, say here and here, that can be keys, and whatever else you might be doing. And so at that point, for a lot of the modeling that I'd like to do, I would then save this as a part. Just going to put this up on my desktop. And I'll save that. And I'll close it. And I know that there's a make assembly from part. I find that that's not the most convenient. So I go to new and a new assembly. And here's where it wants to open a part to go with this. So I'm going to throw in there my wonky base, and it will create that as the base part. You can see that it shows up as being fixed. And now with this, now I've got something to start with if I'm intentionally going to be adding other assembly parts to this. So that's what I just wanted to cover in this short video, is that getting started means deciding what will be your kind of ground plane key part and getting that nailed down as rigorously as you can, and then starting to use that to build up your geometry. Let me show you another part that's similar to this that I've been working on. Look at this one, I think. And if I open up, trying to find which one of these is the assembly. Well, that's the thermoform. We'll give that one a try. Yeah, so here we've got this complicated part. It's actually multi-layers with multi stickers and things. And if you look over in the assembly tree, you can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 unique parts. Some of them are multi-pieces. And the first one that's fixed is this thing that I've called the mid layer. So if I open that up, that is the first part in this structure, and it is the part that everything else is keyed on. And that's quite important because, as you can see, it's got some very complicated geometry. And even in this part, if you look on the left, you'll see the number of things that are in here. Even in this part, if I look at the initial sketch, I think I can look at that. Oh. The initial sketch was set up as something with dimensions that were based upon some core geometry, and then from there I'm building down step by step the core geometry, starting with 1 or 2 key reference positions. In this case, this revolve part was a key location, and so now if I want to go back and change anything, if I change one of the dimensions of that early part, then it will ripple through all the rest of the features in here. And more importantly, if my model is built robustly, a lot of these features will actually stay intact with all of the changes through many different features added beyond that. But then looking at the complexity of this, you can see that There's an awful lot going on here, and it all starts with a couple of simple geometries. In this case, there's this initial cut followed by some patterns, and then another cut that's another key feature, and another set of patterns, etc. Trying to keep as few as possible of those initial key geometric features so that it's easily modified. This one isn't because it's so complicated. If I change one of the dimensions, for instance, if I look at this and I even change this to 34 millimeters, then some things will happen which end up breaking some features of the model. Now, in this case, a small change like that was okay, which is good. But if I go and change this more dramatically, let's say I make it 40, moving that, then it's going to try and rebuild, and I'm pretty certain I'll get a lot of errors. Oh, no, I didn't. So I got one error in one revolution, but for the most part, that stayed pretty intact. There are some features that shouldn't be where they're currently still located, but the rest of it moved around quite nicely. And I promise you that that's not normally the way that this particular model worked out for me. It's because I've made a lot of changes to it that I've actually built a fair bit of robustness in the model, so that changing one of the early on dimensions didn't really damage the model that much. I go back to 35. So that's where we started. Going to change some of the core dimensions. The further back in the feature tree that you go, the more devastating it can be to make a change. For instance, if I make that 100, probably going to get quite a few oddball behaviors in there, and there's a few more red X's and yellow warning signs. So when you think about your key geometry, key features in your geometry, you want to really nail down those things that are core to your model, which you can really trust, and they'll be your starting point. And the further back in your feature tree that you have to go back if you want to edit things or add things or make changes, the more difficult it is for those changes to be implemented all the way through. So think very carefully about how you want to start your model, and make sure you're starting with something that you know really well and that ideally won't change very much, and that has kind of core geometry upon which you'll build the rest of your design. So that's all for now. Thanks for watching. Talk to you again another time.